G'day Bomber fans, so we have our final match sim video of the year. This time next week we're going to be talking about actual practice against an actual AFL team, not just Essendon up against Essendon. This is where fan delusion reaches its peak before it comes crashing down, so soak it all up, flag dons for the next week, and then next Saturday we face the Bulldogs in our first actual proper practice game. Match sim is good and all, but it's Essendon players, Essendon's best players going up against reserves, so it's not always easy to judge. Remember that when listening to this video, but let's get into it. And also a change of scenery, having a little weekend getaway, so I've got a makeshift setup. It might mean the audio is a little bit iffy potentially. Apologies if that is the case. As I'm speaking right now, I don't know if you can hear it, but there is fireworks being set off outside. Alright, so we had an interesting session yesterday. Not a full game like many assumed, but we did have the umps out for the first time, and also the proper Guernseys on display. This was A team wearing the home jumpers, the B team was wearing the new clash strip with the black sash. The funny thing about this setup was the weird number changes we had. So no player was wearing their actual jumper number. Some say it's because Scott wanted to mess with the opposition scouts in attendance, make it harder for them to get a gauge on the game because players were all in different numbers to their usual. That is great if true. That's really old school. But it also did make it a bit confusing for those in attendance as well, especially because there seemed to be quite a bit of team changing, more than usual, some think. So that's another thing to keep in mind. If I talk about some players being on one side, on the A team or the B team, they most likely would have switched at some stage. So it's all well and good seeing all the players start on the A team or wearing the home Guernsey, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily in line for an opening round day start. In saying that though, I think we can get a fair assumption of the players best in line for that start with, I guess, how often they're in the home jumper or the black kit. But let's get into the, we'll go zone by zone today. We'll get into the defense to start with. Actually, change of plans. We're going to start with availability talk because we've obviously got a few guys missing, and I guess it's easier to start with these guys so I don't have to talk about them later in the video. So obviously Guelphy and Davey didn't participate in match sim, although Guelphy was running laps, which was interesting because I think he's only just had his surgery on his hamstring, which would be an interesting time frame to be running on it straight after the operation. So I'm not 100% sure what the deal is there. Archer Day Wicks, Jaden Newen and Zach Johnson are all off to the side, but they could honestly be back in full training fairly soon. Johnson is the most advanced of the three. He's got the fluoro cap and drills. Nick Cox was running laps with a few of them. He's still battling with those lingering concussion symptoms. No time frame with that yet, which is not ideal. There was actually a pretty big rehab group, but the next few are mostly niggles or at the end of their rehab. So Jones had that rolled ankle, which he is resting from still. Might be right for the Bulldogs pracky match, but every chance he isn't risked. Same with Caddy. He's got back soreness, I believe, and he didn't join in. Laverty and Mackay were both missing as well, but they haven't been ruled out for next weekend. We did think Mackay was going to be available because he was in full training during the week, but he's been, I guess, we're erring on the side of caution with that, which is fair. The next few all have been ruled out of the practice game against the Bulldogs. So Ridley has that hamstring, obviously. He is pushing to be right for the Cats hit out the week after. But during the week, Parrish and Durham were ruled out of the Dogs game. So Parrish has he's had a back complaint which he's trying to get on top of. He wasn't even training, I believe. And Durham copped a whack to the ribs last week, and he's going to take a little bit longer to get through that. Neither have been fully ruled out of the Cats hit out, but I suspect that Parrish won't be in that either. He's going to take a bit longer. Hopefully he's fit for opening round to give us some competitiveness for spots. Aside from that though, I don't think there were any fresh injury concerns, which is good. Touch wood. Could have been much worse. Just look at St Kilda the other day. Okay, let's go zone by zone, as I said, starting with the back line. Now, a lot of this is kind of iffy because one team was up against reserves players and the other team was reserves players up against stars, so it was really one-sided. But Zach Reid and Lewis Hayes worked well together from all accounts. Reid especially was really impressive and is moving super freely. It's got me a bit worried, not going to lie. I think for the rest of his career I'm going to be worried about Reid, to be honest, but right now he's looking in great nick. In fact, some say he was right up there with our best performers. And also Hayes was again in the A side because of guys like Mackay and Ridley and Laverty missing, but he had some nice moments. There was a great bit of vision captured of him courageously going back with the flight for a spoil, showing he isn't just smart but tough too when it matters. Shield and Redmond were impressive. They got the plaudits from Josh Barnes at the Herald Sun. He was really impressed by their work of halfback. I think that's our back six almost locked in now, although Jackson Pride did have some nice moments too. He's genuinely right in the mix for opening round as well, especially if Ridley or someone can't come back from injury. I'm going to get to the SSP guys later, but also because of the lack of availability in this zone, we've seen some some non-defenders float back there. So Jerine was there last week and this week too. Vigo Vicentini was playing a fair bit in defence as well, so it's really interesting to see how we combat injury with these match sim scenarios. It kind of gives you a glimpse into the pecking order when injuries strike in the AFL. But yeah, the ball movement from defence to attack was good. Many say it was the best we've moved the ball all pre-season. Probably players rising to the occasion because this was a pretty important session. The things to note really though are Shiel and Reed getting through it okay, looking in great nick, and others stepping up while first team players are injured. Midfield, some really interesting bits of info here. So obviously guys like Merritt and Caldwell were up and about. They are rarely not up and about. Let's talk Sartas though, because lately in training Scott has been testing him with tags. I think one, to get him familiar with what being a top midfielder entails. Not saying Sartas is one yet, but just for the future. So he's had Setterfield acting in a negating role on him, which also gives us insight into a new role for Setterfield, because he's obviously out of favour in the side and frankly not really part of our future, to be honest, especially as that big-bodied mid now, Sartas, is coming along. But if we train him in a tagging role, it can help us find flexibility when teaming up against top engine rooms. Setterfield could start to play roles on Patrick Cripps or Bontempelli or someone. And now, from what I've heard, both have shown pretty good signs in this duel. It's obviously tough to shake a tag, but Sartas hasn't looked hopeless, and Setterfield has obviously got good defensive awareness and stoppages, so there is definitely hope for both of these scenarios, which is ideal. You wouldn't want one of them just dominating the other. Both are doing okay. On the wings, you had Dersmer and Sardell Hawley on the black team for the most part. This Sard and Roberts battle is great because for the most part, they've been battling it out strongly and kind of switching up who was ahead of the other. Now, a few I've spoken to said that Roberts was a bit quiet yesterday. Some even said Sard was a bit duller than usual. That's okay. It's not easy with choppy, changey teams. I'll probably judge them next week. I will say right now that Sard is probably ahead of Roberts. And in the ruck, Brian looked great. He's a lock for round one. Draper too. That's the combo, I reckon. Draper and Brian. Wright is primed for VFL to start the year. Also, Hobbs was up and about a little bit more, which is good because he was lagging behind the pack a tad. He had a strong start to the session and tailed off a tiny bit as it went on, but the fact he had a strong start is better than what's happened in recent weeks. Up forward, Draper was great, especially early. He was a menace to start, kicking goals, taking clunks. Underneath him, you had Kako and Co looking really dangerous as well. The red defence really struggled to keep up with the pace on ground level. Langford was really lively, but again, this zone is so tough to get a gauge on for these sessions because of how one-sided they are. But Langford, Draper and Kako all kicked multiple goals. Kako and Unwin, by the way, these two are genuinely exciting for the future. Kako is exciting for 2025, but no one outside of Essendon will talk about Unwin. He's had eyes on him from friends of the channel for quite a while now. There are many really happy with how he's developing. While we're at it, Angus Clark as well, he had some praise too, especially for his work rate, which is no surprise. I wouldn't say he's on debut watch, but he's coming along nicely. Same with Unwin. I don't think he gets a game ahead of Gresham or Menzies or Kako to start, but another injury or two and one of those guys could be in. Perkins as well, by the way, I'm going to be putting him back in my best 23. He's kind of living up to that stringer role a little bit this pre-season, a bit more mobile and a little bit less dangerous, but he's starting to look pretty good now. So who stood out? Well, I've spoken to a few people and read through a few opinions, and the common occurrence in the chats is usually Sam Draper, but then you also have guys like Dylan Shield, Brian, Redmond and Reed. You got guys like Perkins and Sartas being hyped up, youngsters like Kako and Unwin. For me though, I feel like Draper is the main one, for more reasons than one. You got the fact that he's got that contract running out, free agency. You have him in a new forward role, almost replacing Peter Wright. That's a big deal. He's still on that B team, right? So the story of the session for me has to be Draper because of that, especially if he continues this. Obviously, it's against lesser defenders, but if he goes out and impresses against the Dogs and Cats leading into the new season, well, he's the form player of the preseason. Some that weren't impressive, I've talked about Roberts, who was a tad quieter. That's okay. Menzies as well wasn't amazing, which is not great considering we're lacking small forwards. And while we're at it, the SSP battle, for me it's down to two now, Tom Edwards and Kane Baldwin. Those two had moments. Will Hoare just hasn't been at the level of those two. Baldwin looked impressive, Edwards had moments up forwards. So now we have another week to decide whether we want to bolster our defensive stocks or forward line. My gut feeling is Baldwin gets the nod, but of course there is also the chance we don't even select anyone. That's always a possibility, but Baldwin had a positive session that is good for him, especially leading into the practice match, which I assume that all three will be a part of. But yeah, little match sim recap from training, the last of these discussion videos, because next week I'm going to be going into a lot more detail. I'm going to scour through Game Vision and actually have proper looks at everything with my own eyes, not just what I hear from others at the club. Again though, massive thank you to everyone who's helped with this. I've shouted you out a few times already. Everybody really, a lot of people have chimed in to help, but special thanks specifically to guys like Scooter McNeese, EFC Track Watcher and Charlie Dons. Those three in particular have been so good with their time, not just with me, but with everyone and posting in general. Great brains as well. So cheers a lot to you guys, but also everybody out there. I can't name everyone though. Give those guys a follow on Blue Sky. That's all though. Cheers for watching. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and go Bombers.